Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today we are going to be talking about Ganz Schön Clever, aka That's Pretty Clever, aka Ganz Schön Whatever. Designed by Wolfgang Warsch, amazing designer who's also done games like The Mind, one of my personal favorite games. Like literally probably close to a top 10 game for me. Also Quacks of Quedlinburg, Wavelength, Tavern of Tiefenthal. I feel like just like an all-star designer that perhaps isn't revered as much as his quality output demands. But that's a topic for another time. Super excited to get into this conversation about his most well-known roll and write style game. Brendan, how are you doing today? What are you feeling about this episode?
I'm doing really well, and I'm excited about this episode. I do feel like with Wolfgang Warsch, he seems like one of the most preeminent breakout designers of the last half decade, right? Like almost everyone knows that name. And if you don't, you know one of his games. Just because he hit the market like a rush of inspiration with The Mind and Quacks and Ganz Schön Clever coming out basically all in the same year almost, or within a year or two. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's kind of like a PWH type of guy, sort of like your favorite game designer's favorite game designer category. But I don't see his name brought up, when people are like, what's your favorite designer? You typically get the Uwe Rosenberg, Stefan Feld, Jamie Stegmaier,
Rainer Knizia.
Yeah, I knew I was forgetting one. Richard Garfield. And that's kind of like pretty close to full stop.
Yeah.
But I think these guys, and Wolfgang Warsch is just somebody who's been producing amazing game after amazing game and may well soon find his way sort of into the hive mind as a person in the conversation.
Inspirationally refreshing designs too.
Totally, yeah. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to tell our pre-planners, that's those of you who like to play games along with us to get more out of these episodes, perhaps, if you so choose. We will be covering next week Baron Park. Speaking of PWH, one of his most famous joints. And we'll be joined by friend of the show and game designer Paul Solomon for that. So really looking forward to that. I think we're going to release that as the next episode following this one. After that, we'll have some other ideas in the hopper, but one game we wanted to let you know now that we're planning to cover in the near future is going to be Rift Force, my game of the con for Geekway that I raved about last time. Fortunately for us, and perhaps you, it is in alpha on Board Game Arena right now. So those of you with alpha access can go there and play it. If you don't have alpha access, join us in the Decision Space Discord, and somebody with alpha access or access to this game, like myself and Brendan, can invite you to a game, and we would love to play more games of Rift Force with you. So the link for the Discord, as always, is in the description of this podcast. So join us there. Let's play these games, and then look forward to those episodes. And lastly, last piece of housekeeping here before we get into this conversation, we want to make a pitch, an appeal to you, listener, for reviews for this podcast. Over the past 30 days, 1 month period of time, we've sadly got 0 new reviews. We're not upset. We're just disappointed. But no, seriously, that's probably the way that you can help our show grow the most. It's really easy to do. You just click over to, I think you can do it on Spotify now. You can definitely do it on iTunes. You can also do it on Podcast Addict, probably wherever you listen to the show. You can find a way to give us a review. We'd love to read out on the show, and it would mean a ton to us if you would take the time to do that.
And we've really learned over the course of the past 70 almost episodes that reviews, in addition to telling your friends, which is the optimal way to support the show, like wherever you're going, just have it blaring out of your boombox, whatever,
right. If someone's in your car, captive audience, great time to plug the Decision Space podcast.
Exactly. Second only to those options, reviews are an incredible way from the comfort of your home to support the show. And it really means a lot to us, to all of you who've already done that. But if you haven't had the chance, give us your thoughts. Tell us who's better, Rainer Knizia or Stefan Feld. Tell us what your favorite Paul Solomon game is, Genotype or Honeybuzz. Tell us if Jake was wrong about a game he played at a con. Tell me that I'm dumb for liking light games. I don't know, but I'd love to hear it in a review, especially if it's 5 stars.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get right into this week's episode, and we'll start with this game deep dive discussion, as we always do, with our own personal ratings and brief slogans, captions, whatever you want to call it, for this game. So, Brendan, why don't you give us first your review and then kind of your rating and your capsule review.
Okay, so in classic fashion, this is a very light game. So I have a pretty long little segment here. So I'm sorry, Jake. On road trips growing up, though, Jake, my family would pass around this handheld electronic Yahtzee game, and this little electronic version of Yahtzee made for quick plays of that foundational roll and write, and it tracked high scores. So whenever we would go on road trips, we would play countless games of Yahtzee on this little like Game Boy like delightful Yahtzee machine, and it would go on for years. And I think that if I had a similar device for That's Pretty Clever, roll and writes would be my favorite genre. I think I can say that this device made roll and writes a genre I really love. But the decisions tucked away in Ganz Schön's Clever are delightful, interesting, and fun, and they do make you feel pretty clever. So I really appreciate the timing aspects of the puzzle drawn out from the bonus action system, and trying to sort of find the horizon on when to spend resources feels really great. And a high score in Ganz Schön's Clever does feel delightful, but there's also aspects of this game that can be really frustrating. Dice-driven randomness doesn't always reward optimal decisions, and being arbitrarily punished for taking the quote-unquote right path can be a bear and a little bit frustrating. And at the end of the day, the puzzle in Ganz Schön's Clever is the puzzle in Ganz Schön's Clever. Are we going to call it Ganz Schön Clever? That's Pretty Clever. Maybe we'll discuss that as well. Despite all of this, That's Pretty Clever is an excellent game, 8 out of 10. How about you, Jake?
For me, Ganz Schön Clever is a 7 out of 10. It's like Yahtzee, but better. That's mine. Which I think we kind of just said the same thing, but...
And you wrote that one down this week.
No, I just came up with it while you were going on and on.
Okay. It looks like you're reading it off the screen.
No, I mean, it's a game is very pleasant. It's very fun to play. It's not always what I'm in the mood for, but so quick, so fun, and short, and it's great to have that little app on your phone. Great for flights. That's kind of the place it serves in my collection. But yeah, let's get deeper into the decisions here. Again, the background, Wolfgang Warsch, done a bunch of other great games, 1 to 4 players, and Brendan is going to now give you his amazing rules overview. Brendan, take it away.
That's Pretty Clever is a roll and write game for 1 to 4 players, in which players use 6 different colors of dice to fill in 5 color-coded areas on their player sheets, each one corresponding to a color of die in the game: blue, green, yellow, purple, and orange. The final die is a wild white die that lends the game flexibility and amplifies the nuance of the decisions in the game. That's Pretty Clever is played in rounds. At the start of each round, the active player rolls all 6 dice. Then they select one of them to use to mark off a box on their sheet, setting that dice aside. Any die that are lower in value than the die they selected are moved to a separate area. Then the player rolls again with any dice that are remaining, repeats this process, and finally, to complete their turn, does this one more time, a 3rd time. There's tension in the system because you want to select higher value dice, but in doing so, you might risk removing more dice from the pool. At the end of the active player's turn, each other player selects one of the dice that was moved to the box lid and marks them off on their sheet in the corresponding color and value. Then the active player shifts to the player to their left, and that player rolls the dice and repeats this process again. Each of the game's scoring areas depict boxes, some showing values that are specific. For example, in the yellow area, players are trying to complete rows and columns by using the yellow die or the wild die to mark off specific values: 1, 2, 3, 6, 5, etc. In the green area, each box shows a value that the player must use a green die greater than. For example, the first box is greater than 1, the next box is a green die greater than 2, and so on, until they get to 5, then it resets back down to 1. This repeats on that track a number of times. By filling in boxes, players earn points, and each area has specific rules for point scoring, but they also can unlock bonus actions. For example, completing a box on the purple track might allow the player to fill in a box on the orange track with an orange 4. These bonus actions can stack, setting off a chain reaction. Other bonus actions include re-rolling the dice or taking a bonus action using the one of the dice the active player hasn't yet used this round. After a set number of rounds based on the player count, players tally up their score, and the player with the most points is crowned the victor. At its core, That's Pretty Clever is an impossible and delightful optimization puzzle with chewy and snappy decisions.
Thank you, Brendan, for that fantastic rules overview for this light game. And yeah, you kind of invoked this earlier, but maybe we should just really quickly talk on it's kind of weird, right? How this game has 2 names.
Yeah, it is.
It's because it's got a German language name, Ganz Schön clever, and then in parentheses it says That's Pretty Clever. I think that's on the box, right?
Yeah, in parentheses, on at least the Stronghold Games version published, localized in the United States.
Right.
It says it for all you dumb people who don't know German, that means That's Pretty Clever. But then the Board Game Geek name, the one officially published in the metadata in English, is That's Pretty Clever.
But it's just weird, right? Because lots of games are German designs published first in Germany and then localized in the United States, and we never really would invoke the German language name. Same for any other language. You just go with the translated name. So I don't know how or why this game gets such special treatment by the board game community.
Yeah, I don't get it either. Though Ganz Schön's clever is, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I'm sure to all German speakers, they're totally cringing that I'm saying it in this way. But I will say, saying it right or wrong, whichever I'm saying, is a delightful thing to do. It's fun to say that word, and I wonder if in translation they felt like they couldn't emulate it closely enough to capture the real spirit. So the hyphenated name, or the parenthetical name, excuse me, is like a concession over the fact that we tried to localize it, but nothing's going to be as good as the original title.
That would make sense, and I also think That's Pretty Clever is kind of a lame name for a game.
Yeah, it's not that clever.
It's like a weird little flex, right? It's because it doesn't feel it's not like I'm so clever. It's that's so clever. It feels like it's talking about the game.
The game designer is saying,
this is a little clever. It's a clever little thing that I'm showing you.
Yeah. The game itself is clever.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. We'll see how you shape up.
Yeah. Not you, schmuck.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and you're supposed to say that while you play, I guess, right? That's the idea. Yahtzee. Oh no, that's pretty clever.
Is that a thing? What are you talking about?
That's kind of the idea. Yahtzee's an exclamation of
but Yahtzee, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, Yahtzee is a very much a defined thing in the game. A Yahtzee True. Is getting 5 of the same die face. There's no That's Pretty Clever roll or achievement in the game, is there? Right?
I think when you combo things, you're That's pretty clever.
That's what you say.
Yeah, that's what you say.
You right.
Get your blue 6 to trigger. You finish the row, and then that you get to put in the yellow box, and the yellow box you get to put in the green box.
I know. I get that. I get that.
That's pretty clever.
I do not say that when I play, but let's actually segue this, because the reason I do not say that when I play is because I have 100% played this solo. I'm curious. Have you played this as a multiplayer experience, or what's your play experience with this?
I have primarily played it solo on the app, which is excellent. I really enjoy the solo app, and I think that's why I'm invoking that solo Yahtzee experience. But I have played it once with other people, and I really enjoyed it that way too. And I think the decisions, we'll get into it, but I think the decisions of dice drafting become so interesting. But they're still really interesting in the solo game, because of the mechanic of you typically want really high value dice for most 3 of the buckets, 2.5 of the areas, and then for 2 of them you don't care. And that it's just this interesting puzzle of how to navigate what dice you're taking, what you're giving to other people potentially, or what you're leaving for yourself. But so you never sat there and you said, "That's pretty clever," not once.
That's pretty clever. Maybe
Bridget
I
was like,
did.
Jake, what do you say? What's going on?
Dude, you know this thing where it's like some people don't have an inner monologue in their head,
Yeah.
allegedly,
Yeah.
So,
Allegedly.
I mean, I definitely do, right? I
Yeah,
can
I
like
do too.
hear
Yeah.
myself talk in my head. So
It'd be
maybe in
so
my
weird.
head, I would say like that's pretty clever while I was playing the game,
Yeah. It'd be
but
so
never in
lonely.
like an excited in my head voice. More of like a studious, like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Like it should be called like, oh, hell yeah. When you
that's
roll
right.
all sixes or something. Oh, wait, that's just Yahtzee.
Man, we are getting off the rails today. That's normally not our bit. We're usually so focused. Okay, so let's actually try and characterize the decision space that exists within this game. And also, I'm interested as we go, just kind of thinking about the decision space that exists in roll and write games. I think there's another reason this invokes Yahtzee in a way that something like Cartographers, it's not a roll and write game, it's a flip and write game that we covered, or even going way further back when we looked at Welcome to, also a flip and write game, but those don't invoke Yahtzee because they're themed, I think.
Yeah.
And this one is not. This is really just like Yahtzee. Like, here's your sheet of paper, here's dice. They represent numbers, and you're going to put those numbers onto your board. So I think it's kind of interesting to look at this like hobby board game version of Yahtzee as sort of a lens through which to view kind of like the core of what roll and write games are and kind of the decision spaces that they tend to offer.
Yeah. And I think that this is very easily, very clearly a waning decision space game. Over the course of the game, the amount of available decisions that you have is decreasing. Though there are a few elements, mechanics in the game that help challenge this and help give you agency over when that decision space dramatically wanes, right? You're playing this resource management game of when you use your rerolls, when you use your plus ones, and also when you decide to trigger certain bonuses, because you have control, if you set it up correctly, over when you create these chain reactions by waiting to maybe fill in a certain row in the yellow box such that you could, set this off to set this off to set this off. So you do have agency over the shape of waning. But in my mind, the prototypical roll and write decision space is a waning decision space.
Right.
A
Yeah.
game that doesn't do that is trying to buck the trend and be cute.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's overall waning for sure, with interesting kind of touch points where the game will actually infuse you with like high agency. I'm thinking specifically, I think it's at the end of the beginning of the third round where you get to mark off any box
Mm-hmm.
that you have available with a 6 or an X or whatever, and that's all of a sudden it's like it's interrupting the waning decision space that the entire game occupies, where you start off with this pure pristine sheet of paper that you can fill in, that you will fill in more and more boxes over the course of the game, and then you'll have less and less available to you. um, and it says like it interrupts that and says like, actually, here's a moment where you can ignore that waning decision space that is so pronounced in the game and do whatever you want. And by drawing such a stark contrast there, that makes the juxtaposition of the decision you get to make right now versus what you're doing over the course of the game feel so fun and exciting. And it does that in a couple ways, as you mentioned.
And leads to, you love that moment, right?
Oh
In this
yeah,
game.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's like one of the, maybe we'll talk about it more specifically, but I think that's probably one of the most. I mean, it's fun because it makes you feel powerful, right?
Totally.
In a way that numbers on paper and dice game really has no right to do. It's like, and I think it's also can be a really interesting moment, kind of a pivotal moment where you get to choose your strategy for the game.
Yeah.
And ideally you're kind of planning a strategy prior to that, like planning for it, but yeah, you get to kind of make like a big bet there.
Which can make you feel clever because you're setting up for that moment that you know is coming.
If
Jake's
you say
shaking his
clever
head.
again, I'm turning off the podcast.
I'm pulling up synonyms right now. But I think that moment is indicative of this being a game that's trying to, it's not a waning decision space game that wants the player to struggle. There's a lot of waning decision space games where over the course of play, the game and the fun in it is in figuring out what you're going to do as your agency disappears. And your opportunities are disappearing in Ganz Schön's Clever, but because you're getting new bonuses and because you're sort of activating these powers, it can feel like your agency over the course of the game is actually increasing, and that the game is taking care of you as a player in that way, which I think is actually what unlocks the fun. Is you see the walls closing in around you, but as that happens, you are getting more tools to fight back. We talk about like tools given to the player a lot, and I think that this is an interesting game that, in a really simple way, is like as you play, Wolfgang Warsch is just chucking you tools. Like, here's a spanner, here's a saw, right? Like, as you go, the game is like, that's the game. It's like catching these tools and figuring out where to slot them in. And a lot of other winning decision space games that we've played don't necessarily do that. And that's a cool feature.
I hadn't thought about it that way before, so I just kind of want to like rephrase that for the audience, because I think you're dead on, and that is exactly what makes this game so interesting, which is that, the designer has basically made it so that you've got a waning decision space that is emphasized by every part of the game.
Yeah.
What you're doing round to round with less and less dice, what you're doing on your board, the game decisions are waning and waning, but as they wane, you are getting sharper and sharper tools to play in that space. And it does that with the rerolls, right? By the end of the game, sometimes you have 4 rerolls where you can just keep rerolling your dice until you get exactly the one die you need to fit in the one spot you have still available. And it's also giving you like extra die to be able, the plus ones are kind of doled out over the course of the game.
Yep.
So when your decisions are smallest, you feel the most powerful to actually achieve what you want. And I think that is really like a masterclass of game design.
And totally key in making this a game you want to play again when you finish. Because if you don't have those tools, the randomness of the dice being rolled, which is inevitable, is just going to frustrate you. So you'd rather give the player tools at the end of the game to try to make what they want to happen and say, okay, well, at least I saved this stuff to try to make these calls, rather than just being a shot where it's like, oh, the dice didn't get rolled. I guess they didn't get rolled. Oh no. Right. And like at its worst, it can feel that way. But at its best, it's like, yeah, I saved my re-rolls and I got the exact six that I needed to fill the exact box. And like, it's amazing. And it's
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, should we move on to theme? Brendan, what do you think about the theme in this game? Would you say it's like a high like environmental theme? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We're not going to touch on.
I do like the foxes. The little fox is cute.
That was a joke.
I know it was a joke. Okay.
Is there anything else in the decision space that you feel like we need to touch on? We talked about the type of decision space,
the
and
feel.
the feel a lot. Let's think about too, like the clarity. So like on your turn, you have, and with that the size. So on your turn, you have between 1 and 6 options of the colored dice that you can use. It's 6, right?
Yeah.
Or is it 5?
No, there's 5 colors, and then there's the white die.
White, yeah. So you have between 1 and 6 options, but often much less than that, right? Because in the first roll of a given round, you're not going to take 1/6 that effectively throws away the other 2 remaining turns, right?
Yeah,
so we can easily declare that in that situation a choice, right? With 100% clarity, it would never be optimal to take that action in round 1 of the game. So really, it feels like the decision space in any given turn, like any given roll of the game, more often than not, you have like between 1 and 3 actually viable decisions to make.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. In that sense, it feels pretty small. But of course, the game gives you tons of those decisions, right? It doles them out again and again and again. Enough repetition with that you really have. It feels like you have plenty of time to make better or worse decisions over the course of the game that are going to create drastically different outcomes at the end of the game, right? Talking about like scores ranging from 150 to 300.
Totally. And I feel like on top of that too, Jake, is we haven't covered that many games on the show where dice rolling is a factor. Just looking back over the course of the last 70 episodes, there aren't that many. So we haven't talked about a little bit why D6s are so magical in some ways. And it's because the probability of a die roll is known. It's easy. It says I know the chance of rolling a orange 6 if the orange die is rolled next turn is 1 in 6. I know that. And I think that this game does a good job of making the decisions feel rewarding and putting just enough information, but then also just enough fuzziness with like the white die and the different systems that are there to not make you want to like go mad thinking about the probabilities, but enough that you can think about the probabilities and the amount of turns you have left and sort of say, I can afford not to fill in this box now because I think I'll have the chance to do it again. Whereas this purple 6 feels really valuable, so I should just do that. And then it adds this wrinkle with like the blue area where you have 2 dice coming together. So I don't know. I think that it's really clear, but there's a lot of uncertainty because it's die rolling.
Absolutely. I actually like this far in the episode and talking with you about how good this design is. I'm already gonna I'm bumping up to an 8 already. Like,
let's go. 24-minute bump. Here we go.
Yeah. But it's so true. And I think like it's pretty amazing how often the game gives you 2 choices, but it's very fuzzy about what's better. And I think the richest, decisions in that space. And the reason I'm bumming up is because like I'm reminded of Castles of Burgundy, like my favorite game of all time. And I think they both do such a similar thing with dice where it sets up this engine that makes it so like rolling the dice like every time is like giving you your own little puzzle to unpick. And I just think it's so amazing that games can be this kind of like Sudoku puzzle generator, and this one does it so well.
Yeah.
Because the decision can really be straightforward, right? Okay, I can take the lowest value dice and fill this spot, but like so quickly complexity gets added in. It's like, okay, but like I really could use this 5 now, but that 5 will mean I only have 2 dice to play with in the other 2 rounds. And what is the chance that, if I roll the green die first, then that'll mean it's impossible for me to use the yellow die. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like the complexity. If you want to spend time and think through this, each of these puzzles feels knowable, or it doesn't feel knowable. It feels like just fuzzy enough, like right just on the edge of your ability to actually calculate the best option, that it's like always interesting.
Totally. It's also, so many of the games that we play, the decisions of what you should do within a given puzzle aren't necessarily obvious, right? Like a lot of games, maybe it is kind of obvious. Like the ideal thing would be to do X. But in a lot of games, like A Feast for Odin, I don't know what the optimal thing I should actually be doing is typically. And the design of that game is designed because the fun of it is exploring that decision space. And Ganz Schön's Clever is the opposite, right? Like I know what I should do in the purple puzzle. I should always put a 6 in it every single time, right? Like easy. I've got it. But the interesting thing is working within those juxtaposed puzzles and figuring out the juicy, interesting heart of this game, which is the system of the waning dice when you're the active player. And I think that that's another amazing aspect of the system with regards to the decision space is it's both a breath of fresh air at the start of a round when you have all 6 dice and a breath of fresh air when you're making the final decision as an active player and you only have to worry about picking between 3 of them. Like I love both of those. And I love that the game does both, because if I was rolling 6 dice every single turn, it's like, oh my gosh, it's too much, even though it's a really simple game. And if I'm only working in a really small space, it sucks. So this game is just that it's dynamic. Like if you have to pick one word for Ganz Schön's Clever and why it's so good, it's because it's a dynamic game. And it emphasizes that dynamism with the bonus system. And that's what makes it brilliant, is it takes us like, it knew what it was and made it more itself through adding that system. So good.
I mean, it really feels like Wolfgang versus like Monopoly. Monopoly, like Yahtzee. Yeah, right. It was like, I'm going to make Yahtzee awesome.
Yep.
And
people get to play on other people's turns. What's the crappiest thing about Yahtzee? I get to sit here and watch my brother play. Like, okay, why'd you do that? Oh no, I don't, like, I'm not engaged, right? But in Ganz Schön Clever, you are engaged. I care what dice you don't use. I might even say like, oh, you don't want to take that one. If you roll like a yellow 3 and I really want that yellow 3 to slide over to the tray. And those moments, then I love moments where I'm engaged in watching other people roll dice.
Right.
Because it's fun.
And whether they use that yellow 3 or not, you're you are paying attention, right? If they
Mm-hmm.
don't use it, you're like, yes.
Yeah,
If they do use it, you're like, no, like, why
totally.
would you do that? And that's so much better than being like checking your phone. Oh wait,
Yeah,
is my turn?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so that's like a fantastic, innovation. And actually, as we talk about what roll and write games can do, they seem to be one of the best mediums we have in the board game hobby for like allowing people to play on the same turn, right?
Yeah,
And this one
yeah,
does it in a small way where a lot of roll and write games is just like, here's the roll, now everybody, go to town. And I think it's just a small segue. Like I think there's an aside. There's trade-offs of both things because I recently played Riverside and I talked about it at Geekway, and that game was purely one person rolls. They don't get any special privilege being the
hmm
active player. It could be the same person rolling every single time. Um, and then everybody just uses those dice equally to fill out their sheet. And that's kind of a drag in some ways because like you don't like it doesn't have that like dynamic feeling of like now it's my turn. So like
yeah,
I get like to lead the, you know, play. And also it's like it really just like highlights the multiplayer solitaire, right? We played with 6 people and like the person at the far end of the table from me, like, I had no clue what was happening with them, and it's
yeah. And it didn't matter.
right, it didn't matter. And here it's like you get that little moment which is so fun in board games where it's like, okay, now I'm the star of the show and everybody gets to watch me and I get to make choices.
I want roll and rights to give, for some reason, I feel like within this movement of the revivification of roll and rights over the course of the last half decade, when they've like really crashed back onto the scene around the time that Welcome to was first published, and since then, I feel like there's been this thing where initially they were published and they were like, well, why would you want to play this game where you're filling out a worksheet? You could play it with up to 100 people. How cool is that? And it is cool, but what's also cool, mixing up that formula. And I wish Roll and Rights had the permission to do more things like this, because I like that both can exist, and I don't feel like games should have to just like Roll and Write games should have to justify the fact that we shouldn't all have to play simultaneously. Like I want more of this. I still want simultaneous play, shared input Roll and Rights that I could play with all 6,000 people that live in my town,
Right.
even
But
though I'll never do it.
yeah, I mean, having a game that plays up to 6,000 is actually not filling an important niche in
Niche in my
my.
life. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's jump into the actual dice selection mechanism and what makes it so good and interesting.
Okay,
So,
let's do it.
yeah. So I touched on this briefly to say that the I guess the exciting thing about the dice selection mechanism is the inherent trade-off, right? The higher value dice are better
Yep.
because in at least one, two, I guess in 2 of the areas on your board, you just get points equal to the die values that are placed there. So
Yep.
in both those 2, the orange and the purple sections, you'd always prefer to have 6s placed into them. And sometimes you'd really prefer it. But we'll talk more about the specific values. But even in the ones that don't require or that don't give you points just for the raw sum of all the die values that you write into that column, the higher numbers are more valuable because of the fact that when you take a high valued die, any dice that has a lower value, you no longer have access to that round. You
Mm-hmm.
won't roll them anymore. So even though in the yellow area I don't get points for putting a 6 down there, if I have the opportunity to use a 6 in yellow or a 1 in yellow and it's the same difference to me, like I would pick the 6 every time.
And the yellow 6 that's in the bottom right of the board is a really important square. So though it's not that it's literally better than putting a 4 on your board in some cases, the yellow 4, they've been privileged somewhat in the design of the sheet with yellows, because that bottom yellow 4, if it's the yellow 6, if it's the last one you place, could be getting you 20 points, an extra die, and a fox, which could be really impactful.
That's big time.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it is impactful if you get it. That just goes back to like how this decision space yields like interesting decisions not almost every time. Sometimes you like get a slam dunk, right? it's like, oh, that's exactly what I needed, so I take it. Especially on the last roll, right? Once you're down to like one or two die. But in those times, like in those scenarios where the decisions aren't interesting, it's the exact same thing in Castles of Burgundy. Like if the decisions aren't interesting, it's because something like really emotionally dynamic is happening in my
Yeah.
head where I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I needed. Or in this game, it's like, damn, like I now like not you can put yourselves in position in this game where you can't write anything for one of the roles. And if that happens to you, it's like, especially because I just play solo on my app, it's like, well, I might as well just like start over because it's
It's
like
you
that
feel like you lost the game.
devastating.
It feels like a fail case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Especially if it's not in the last turn of the game, like, oh god.
Right.
Yeah, I think also too, Jake, the fact that everything isn't equal is important for the game's decision space, because okay, if you roll all sixes, great, so fun, I'm excited, is whatever. But if you roll all low values and I have a reroll, that then becomes an even more interesting decision, because do I spend my reroll just to eke out a little bit better value? Can I use that low value to leverage that crappy outcome in some way that still benefits me? Or do I need to spend my skill is tested, right? Is now the time to spend a reroll? Do I have to fill in certain squares now to have a chance at pushing further on a certain track that I've invested in? And we'll talk I think, a little bit more about like how this game, like, can you specialize? Do you have to be a generalist? We'll get into that, I think. But I think that makes the decisions really interesting. And I love saving up my rerolls for the end. But sometimes I feel like I have to use it on turn 3 when I roll like a bunch of ones and twos, you know?
I think that's like one of the most difficult decisions in the game is like how to use the bonuses that you get. Like
Yeah.
it's not just the rerolls, like it's also the plus ones that you get, so that allow you to place an extra dice. Like I played this game a lot, like a lot more than I played most games we cover on the show, because of the fact that I'm playing it as like an app that I can play through around in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I went on a 2 hour flight the other day and I played this game like 50 times.
Totally.
you know,
Yeah.
so and like I still, even after all those plays, like I still don't have a really good sense for like, especially in the second or third round, you maybe have a one or two plus twos of it, or plus one extra dice available to you, and I never get like a good sense. Like the game doesn't have like great feedback mechanism in it for like when I use one of those early versus later.
Mm,
Because I feel like I get to the end of the game and I either get a good score or a bad score. It's hard to know like on what
grounds.
to base that on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like it's tough to know how to use those as they're doled out.
Totally. One way that the game does get feedback is you could end up in a spot where if you save them, right? Like there's this good tension with the plus ones where it's like, I want to use them on what I have to use them on. So later in the game, I want to be able to use them to fill in holes or spots that I have where it didn't come up, especially in the yellows or the blues. But if I wait too long and what I need doesn't come up, then I've kind of wasted the value of them, right? Like there's this tension between, if I can use it to add an extra purple 6, that's a lot of points. But if in doing that, I give up the chance to fill in a crucial spot in the yellow grid and I miss out on 20 points because of it or something, the dice didn't roll right or whatever, then that means I used it incorrectly by using it too early. But if I wait and the stuff that gets rolled, there's just not the dice that I need for the plus ones, and I'm like trying to hole fill and I have nothing to fill the holes with, then that feels really bad too. So I like that it's another timing puzzle, sort of. But I agree, the feedback's not great.
Also, using it early has the other benefit, I think, of kind of letting you know what you will need.
Yeah,
So like
sure.
if you use it early to get a purple 6 or whatever that unlocks chains into some other combos early on, then you might have a better sense as you get into the next round. It's like, okay, I have to take this yellow 4 here because right, like I just
Yep.
know that's going to be something I'll need. So I think it's interesting, and at least for me, remains like an elusive decision to sort of crack the optimal play of.
Totally. And in a stunning turn of events, sarcastically speaking, we really like the mechanism that gives you complete like freedom and agency in the game, which we, whether it's the Pinecone and Cascadia or these sorts of mechanisms we like. And I think make games better almost unequivocally. But if you have an example of a game you think, and now I'm talking to the listener, not to Jake, if you think you have an example of one of these sort of skill testing mechanisms where you have a limited pool of tokens that you can spend to do this moment of high agency in a skill testing way, if you have an example of a game where you think that makes the decisions worse, I would love to hear that example.
Great question. I too am interested. But let's jump on and let's briefly touch on the different tracks in the game and kind of the different decisions that they all offer.
Totally.
Man, there are a lot of decisions interwoven in this game. What do we call it, Brendan, when we have a lot of different goals that are all happening?
Like overlaid.
Yeah, but it's not overlaid.
Juxtaposed.
It's juxtaposed, right? Would we consider this like juxtaposed? Because each of these tracks have their own goals and pursuits that we're trying to achieve.
And progress at one comes at the opportunity cost of doing the other. Right. So that's why they're juxtaposed.
The overlaid puzzle here is the foxes, right? The bonuses.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, there we go.
Good.
We
Cleaned
got
up.
there.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about the yellows first. Here, I'll let you kind of go first.
Okay. So I think we should do like I will be fully honest. I played this game a ton and I still don't know what the optimal way to play the game is. And I think part of that is because the optimal way to play the game is whatever way your dice allow you to optimally do in a given play of the game.
But
yellow rocks.
There are definitely people that know better. Like there are people like I think we can just say this now because I think you kind of invoked it. Like I think this game potentially has a shelf life, right?
Sure.
I think that there is probably like an optimal sort of like order pursuit to fill out these tracks. Yeah. And once you've kind of figured that out, it might not be that fun for you anymore. And I know that because I've seen people in our Discord say that, and they're like, I just broke it out. I wish I remember who was saying this, but they're like, yeah, I just broke it out again. Here's my score. And it was like 287, which is like an insanely high score for me. But I think that shelf life is just going to be kind of dependent on how good you are at crack this kind of puzzle. Yeah. At least for me, it's hundreds and hundreds of games.
Sure. Same. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The puzzle in each. Yellow's really interesting. I really like yellow. You are rewarded for filling in rows with bonuses and columns with points, and the diagonal gets you a +1. I think that yellow is really good because it gives you flexibility. Right? Like the yellow dice it's fairly agnostic to which are important. Low values are pretty important, and so are high values are pretty important. So you can sneak in yellows at given times. I think the points don't pay off super huge, and the bonus actions. I think when we evaluate the different areas, we have to talk about it in terms of the points you're going to get versus the bonus actions. It's like average, but it's good. It's like your bread and butter. Like I like yellow. I feel good when I'm filling in yellow.
Definitely yellow is not one that I feel like, I think like in this game, like you have to, right? It's a game that's asking you very, very explicitly to specialize and diversify, right? Like you get the most points for each set by completing all the values in it. And yellow works the same way because the last die that you put in is definitely unlocking the last box you check off is definitely unlocking at least two things. Huge benefits. Yep. You're going to get points and you're going to get a free unlock. And all of them work the same way, right? Where you get the most benefit for filling them in all the way. But you also want to get specialized because you get points for foxes equal to your least valuable one. I don't think that... So I find that my games play out where I'm like always have one that is sort of the one I've neglected the most. Yeah. And I don't think yellow is one that you can neglect the most and be successful.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that that's a product of the flexibility that it gives your plays. I agree with you that I typically don't neglect yellow. And when I've tried to, I feel myself pulled in and pulled in and pulled in. And I think a lot of that is because of the way that values work in yellow, you kind of get forced into it in terms of leaving more dice open if a bunch of them roll low. You're just like, okay, I'm going this direction. And blue functions this way a little bit, but because it requires a more specific roll to fill things in, it's inherently less flexible. Blue is really interesting because blue can give a lot of points overall. Overall, in terms of the actual points you're getting from yellow, right? You can get 36 plus 14 is 50 plus 10 is 60.
That's a
And
lot.
that's a lot. And blue gives 56 overall if you fill in all 11 squares, but yellow has 12 squares. So overall, for your opportunity, blue is giving you slightly more points. But I find blue can be tough because you have to make oftentimes concessions to fill in the 2 or fill in the 12 because you need the double sixes or the double ones, and or you have to spend a bonus doing it, is what it ultimately comes down to a lot of the times.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, about blue, I think, is it has the hardest like the hardest boxes to check off in the
Yes.
whole game.
Yeah.
Like rolling a 6 specifically on a white die and specifically on a blue die is very rare, right?
Yeah.
Again, you don't have to know the exact probability of that to just like intuitively know, like, okay, it's pretty unlikely to just roll double sixes. And the same with double ones, of course. So I feel like blue has like a different kind of like pulling effect where if you have the opportunity to just cross off your 12, it's really hard to not take that opportunity right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like again, blue is it's a good one. It also has the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bonuses if you fill it out all the way on top of all those points. So it's a difficult one to neglect. Really interesting the way it works out. I agree.
Also, if you're curious, the chances of rolling to the blue 6 and the white 6 at the same time, 2.8% of the time. So it's pretty low.
Yeah, pretty low.
Yeah.
But you can actually increase your odds of it getting it if you or no, you can't really do it with this 12, right? Interestingly, because of
I see what
the
you're.
dice drafting mechanism, the 12 is strictly harder to get than the 2
Yeah.
because sometimes like if you see that you've rolled a blue 1 and you are trying to cross off the blue 2 square, you could strategically choose a higher dice to put the 1 blue die in out of the game so that you have 2 more rolls plus re-rolls to get the white die to roll a 1 and achieve that. So you could, yeah,
1/6 of the time, 16%. You've locked it in.
exactly. So it's not that you have to roll it in one shot necessarily, but very, very difficult to get that 12, which also makes it so that when you have that one opportunity at the beginning of the 4th round to put anything in there, it feels like I think that's probably the square that I'm crossing off the most with that.
The 12 or the 2?
The 12.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This makes me want to get into why that might be, but I think we should cover the other squares and then we can come back to
Okay.
foxes.
Okay, so the greens is you have to have higher die values in each subsequent one. Once you've reached 5, then it starts over with 1 again.
So the optimal way to play this row is you only ever put the apex of what you need. You should never put like a 6 green and a 1 because you've messed up a little
Right.
bit. It's inefficient.
Well, yeah.
It's okay if it
you're doing
happens.
if you're doing the last roll anyway,
Yeah.
it's fine, but it feels bad still, but that might just be like some kind of like
Trick.
it feels wasted, right? But it wouldn't really be wasted.
Well, I think if it's juxtaposed with pursuing a purple or an orange, it's a little bit wasted, right?
Yeah.
But if it's and there's a good value that you could get, yeah, it depends. It all depends on the value of the dice, but it feels bad.
Have you like ever made it to the end of the green track?
I think green's really hard to get to the end to, and I'm not sure I have.
I don't know that I have either, and I feel like that's because of what you're saying now. Like I think it's like my brain is telling me like, oh, it's always a waste to put this in there. So like in the first round of the game, basically if I don't roll a green 1, I'm not putting anything in the green.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then it's already like you're already behind the 8 ball there.
One thing that's
Making it
awesome about green, though, not a ton of bonuses, but there's 11 spaces in green. So if you fill in all of green, you get 66 points, which is the amount of points that you'd get if you put all sixes in purple. So it's really rewarding. You get fewer bonuses than if you filled in purple with all sixes, for sure, because purple is like very bonus heavy. But green, in terms of points, is pretty generous. Out of the straight lines filling in puzzles, it kind of it drips points, but
yeah.
it's restrictive.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that is what is keeping me from breaking the 300-point barrier, which is
Yeah,
possible, but I've never achieved.
dip into green. Though I
Yeah,
will say, I think one of my favorite decisions in the game is because of the restrictiveness in green is trying to plan my green X bonuses, right? When you like fill in the
right.
third row of yellow or whatever, like I always am like trying to save those for when I can use it to cover up at least greater than or equal to 4, and ideally the greater than or equal to 5. And I definitely don't want to use it when I have a greater than or equal to 1. Like, oh my gosh. I'm so
Right.
sorry for throwing out this beautiful gift you gave me, Wolfgang. You know? Okay, let's talk about orange.
Yeah, orange. I think like green and orange are my two leading candidates for like neglecting them for too long and ultimately shooting myself in the foot. So orange has it's like the most open. You can put anything in orange at any time, and then you just get straight points at the end of the game equal to what you put in there, which is cool. It's like the straight man that keeps everything, all the wacky other ones, honest. And then every on the fourth square, the seventh, ninth, and 11th square, you get multipliers for what you put in there. So if you put a 6 in the fourth square, you're not just getting 6 points, you're getting 12. And if you get all the way to the end and put a 6 in there, that's 18 points with one die, which is actually insane value.
Yeah, crazy value compared to any other action in the game. You've invested a lot to get there. There's not as many bonus actions as there are on purple. There's slightly more than there are in green. I find myself neglecting orange too, Jake, and I think it's because it doesn't have flashy lights. It's this is so weird. I feel like only in Ganz Schön's cover would I say something along these lines, but orange is kind of like eating your vegetables. Like everything else, you get fireworks, and here it's just like I should probably be putting things in orange because I'm gonna
Yeah.
get a bunch of points. But
It's like you'd never want to put like a 3 in there, right?
right,
It or lower, and even like a 4 doesn't feel great.
yep,
So I think it has the same thing with like the green going on early, where it's like sometimes you probably should be doing that, but if I have the choice between a 3 orange and marking off something in almost any other category, I usually neglect the orange one.
though the
But
flip side,
yeah, I'd say the flip side is like a 4 in there. That's honest work,
yep, yeah, and
That's getting the job done.
totally, and even if you're putting a 3, which doesn't feel great, if it creates an opportunity to get that 18, or if you put a 6, sixes
Yeah.
in both the 2x's towards the end of the track and the 3x, I don't know, it's kind of paid back for the hard work you put in.
Yeah,
So
and also the 10 space gives you a 6 in purple, which is huge.
yeah,
So, I mean, I think you really get rewarded for getting the end of this track. I maybe have done it a couple of times, probably not enough because I don't want to eat my vegetables. I want to play with the super fun, sexy purple track.
yeah. And I'm happy to put low value things in it and shoot myself in the foot. I think purple, you have to be really disciplined, right? Because what we were talking about orange, the flip side's true of purple. You and I, our headspace is like, oh, I'm putting a 3. Oh, well, it gets me a +1. Oh,
Right.
well, it
Yeah,
gets
it
me a
gives me
yellow
that
X.
bonus. Let's go.
Exactly. Yeah. And the bonus could be good. I mean, it's always value, but its value is surely better on a 5 or a 6 than it is on a 1 or a 2.
Yeah, and the other thing I forgot to say about orange is it has the same thing with green, where you have to be putting things in orange so that you've at least filled up the first 3 by the time you get an orange bonus.
Yeah.
Or else it feels awful.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
Totally. We should say, Jake, we didn't say in purple you have to go in ascending order. So if you do a 1, then you can do a 2, then you can do a 3, but you can't put a 2 until you get to 6, and then you get to start over.
Which also tricks you because then I can talk myself into a 1 in purple.
Sure.
It's not that bad because then I can do another purple really soon and get another sweet bonus.
But it's probably pretty bad. 1 point per die, you're not scoring too high, even if you get a bonus. Yeah.
But subjectively, it gets me, and maybe that gets us to like finally to like the bonuses and combos portion of
Yeah.
this conversation, which is like what this game does is it gives you bursts of endorphins when you get
Yeah.
to chain off combos. And like I feel like playing this game now is like I'm like so, it's like my brain is telling me like you feel good when you fill in the purples,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
purples give you the combos which combo into other things, right? Like I don't feel good when I put a 4 down, but I do feel good when in orange to get 4 points, but I do feel good when I put a 1 in purple to get 1 point.
Yeah.
It's like that's telling me something about like what is happening subconsciously in my brain with, and like the incentives there are not necessarily the incentive for actually scoring good in this game.
Totally. I'm basic and I like it.
Yeah, right.
That's filling in purple with ones, yeah. And I'm right there with you. And I think that that's an interesting part of the game is like to play really well, you do have to be disciplined in what you do because you
Right.
are trying to like juxtapose and the uncertainty of how much the fuzziness of this game is like, what's the value of a blue X? It depends. Like the filling, getting the blue X bonus on purple. What's the value of it? It depends on what you do that follows it, what other things are rolled, like all that is really variable. So that's some of the fuzziness. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Okay, wait,
definitely purple is the Candy Crush row. I'm
totally.
calling it.
What's your favorite color and what's your least favorite color?
Okay, my favorite color is purple and least favorite is orange, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I think my favorite is yellow, which I'm sure it's not that great. Like I know strategically I should be doing it, but I just like.
I mean, if you get all sixes in purple,
Yeah,
that has to be the best value row.
value. Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, I guess we should. And then my least favorite is orange, but I know I need my vegetables. Okay. Foxes. This is like the Renner Knizia mechanic, right? Where like foxes, you can get up to 5, and then you score the number of foxes you have times the points that you have in the area you did the least of. And this is why, Jake, you say that even though everything else tells you to specialize, foxes say, nah, you, dear player, must be a generalist because the
Right.
points there potentially are in. Speaking of the most points possible, that is where things get astronomical potentially. But it's really
Have
hard to get 5 foxes. It
have
is
you
really
got
hard.
them?
All 5?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever gotten all 5 foxes.
I don't think I have either. And I'm looking at this board now. That's why I have up on my
Yeah,
phone
we're
as we
both like,
record.
yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like it'd be that hard
Yeah,
to do it. And yet, like the game when you're playing it
makes it feel that way.
makes it feel that way and I think that's because like the appeal of specializing is so high,
Yeah.
right? Like okay, like I mean to get all the foxes, it would just take 3 squares in yellow, 4 squares in blue, 7 in green, 8 in orange, and 7 in purple. So it's really the green and the orange because your brain's just like, no, you don't want to spend all that time diddling around in green and orange to get those foxes.
But if you only do, right, if you only do 4 in blue, the points in blue are 7. And if you only do the 4 in yellow, the points in yellow are 0. So you then have to do like, okay, have to do at
Yeah,
least
but
the 2 extra.
yeah, but you could do 6 in yellow and get 20 there.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd feel good. And then you got to work on blue a little. This is how we end up being generalists because
Right.
it's like if I'm going to get 5 foxes, I better make it count. Yeah. So I
If you
like
do
this mechanic.
6 yellow, 6 blue, then I think you're in business.
Yeah. I feel like we might be getting close to if you fill in the whole board and doing
Yeah,
good
right.
territory. But that's okay. I think this mechanic is the type of mechanic. This is a cherry on top mechanic. It's where like the game without this is awesome. And then you add this and it's like, well, you did it. This is people are gonna talk about this in 10 years. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good.
It's a good mechanism for sure. And I mean it's just such a solid thing. Oh, drop my phone.
Just like that phone, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dude.
it is just such a solid thing. Like it works so well. And part of that is that it doesn't matter because of the I don't know. The fact that this game does have shared inputs, right? We've mostly played it as a solo game, but it does have shared inputs because the dice that I don't draft you get. I think that little bit of coupling makes it so the randomness of like I rolled and I rolled amazing and you rolled really poorly balances out and still feels fair. And that's the pill that I think is tough for some people to swallow with roll and writes where you don't have shared inputs. So I think it also wins on that account. I don't know why this game is just an 8 for me though. I think ultimately, Jake, it's because at the end of the day, it's it's an incredibly consistent experience in terms of its decisions.
Right.
I'm always making the same types of decisions, and that's why the person you were talking about earlier, who's an avid decision space listener, friend of the show, William, said, I've eaten that meal enough. I'm looking for something else. And I think that that's why I feel that way too, is ultimately Ganz Schön's Clever is Ganz Schön's Clever, and it's great, but it's still always the same thing.
Yeah. I think that's why I initially kind of went with a 7 and now it's an 8.
Yeah.
But like the negatives is what is that there's a shelf life, I
Yeah.
think. There is. And I think like every time I play it, it's like I've got nothing else to do. Like
Yeah.
that's the time I reach for this game. If I haven't played it multiplayer, I'm sure it's fine
Yeah.
multiplayer, right? But I don't even if I don't imagine I would pull this off my shelf very often if I had people over to play games. I think I probably like it best as that uh, high score generator that you can pass around,
Yeah.
and play with friends that way, or just compare scores online that way. Which ultimately, like in the greater context of board gaming, is not what I play board games for.
Sure.
It's amazing at filling that niche. Like I'm so happy I have this downloaded on my phone for flights and stuff like that, and I would recommend it to anybody for that. I like this app much more than I liked playing uh, Cartographer app on
Yeah.
my phone.
Yep.
And I think part of that is just because of that kind of like vintage appeal. Like it really feels like this is like Yahtzee but awesome.
It's a game for the ages. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Even if the age of time that you play it for is short. It's also why, someone's been screaming, Jake, for the last hour and 2 minutes. Well, maybe 40 minutes. That we haven't said that Twice So Clever and Clever Cubed exist. And that is the response, the panacea to this conversation, right? It's like, okay, you did this, now have this flavor. Now have this
Right.
flavor. And that's great. That's why those have been those follow-up games designed by Wolfgang Warsch have been as successful as they've been. And I don't feel the need to go back because I think the well is going to taste pretty similar. And I'd rather play a different roll and write. I'd rather play Riverside, like Jake mentioned, and try that one because I really like that designer. Or heck, I'd love to go play Railroad Inc.
Yeah. I think the other reason that this game works better for me in that like solo app roll and write game than others is because like the decisions are so bite sized, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
we talked about, yeah, they can like you can spend as much time as you want thinking out your turn. And I think the decisions like the decisions you're given warrant that. Like if you spend a lot of time thinking about it, you could probably do better, but you don't have to at
yeah,
all. You can just quickly play it and intuit it in a way that I think like cartographers just like asks more of you. Like
totally.
you have to like think about like, okay, what is like the objective in 3 rounds from now? And all this other stuff. Where here I don't care about that at all. Every decision is just leading to the next one in such like like the game flows, I think, much better for that. But yeah, like so I think that is sort of the niche that this one fills.
Agreed. Well, I think
Also, Brent, okay, last thing on it, right? So we talked about what a great designer Wolfgang Warsch is. We talked about there's uh, the second and third version of this, but what has Wolfgang been doing lately? I saw just today, the day that we're recording this, he has 2 games in the Kinderspiel des Jahres nominee for best children's game of the year. Quacks and Co., a kid's version of Quacks of Quedlinburg, and Ouch Sean Clover, kids version of this game, which honestly I want to play. Like I feel like a kids version of this game might be just like super awesome
sick.
for me.
Yeah. I think that, so I'm going to quote Jeff Engelstein from an episode of Ludology, and I've never forgotten this, and I think it's true. It's Wolfgang Warsch's world, and we're just living in it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Decision Space. Brendan, it's been awesome chatting with you. Uh, Please do give us a review if you find yourself with a few moments to spare. You can join our Discord. You can find us on Twitter. You can support our Patreon. We have links for everything in the description for this podcast. As always, we want to thank Hembry for our intro and outro music, their song Reach Out. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Also, for all you listeners out there, remember, Jake's mom accidentally gave us 1 star in a review on iTunes, so just help us balance it out. Okay, have a good week. Barron Park next week. Rift Force, bye!